At 9 a.m., my badge didn't work. I tried it twice, then a third time. Slower, like the reader might suddenly understand me better if I was patient. Red light, no beep. Just that dead click that tells you the system already knows your name and has decided you don't belong anymore. I checked my phone, half expecting some calendar reminder I'd forgotten. Nothing. No email, no Slack message. Just a single text from an unknown internal number. Please come to HR when you arrive. I hadn't even arrived yet. By the time I turned around, a woman I'd only seen once before was already walking toward me. Clipboard tucked into her arm. Calm smile. The kind people practice in front of mirrors. Hi, she said. You must be Daniel. I'm with People Operations. Let's step into the conference room. She didn't say why. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't offer coffee. She just gestured toward a glass room near reception. Already booked, already waiting. Inside, my laptop refused to connect to Wi-Fi. My email wouldn't load. Slack logged me out and asked for credentials I suddenly no longer had. Even my phone lost access to the company VPN. It happened all at once, clean and surgical, like someone had rehearsed it. This is a temporary access reset, she said finally. Standard procedure. For what? I asked. She smiled again, same smile. We just need to ask you a few questions. What followed didn't feel like questions. It felt like fishing. Vague phrasing, long pauses, notes written without eye contact. Was I aware of company policy around vendor communications? Had I shared internal documents externally? Did I feel safe at work? That last one almost made me laugh. Almost. I'd worked there for 4 years. Mid-level role. Not flashy, not invisible. The kind of job where you're trusted enough to see how things actually work, but not important enough to be protected when they go wrong. I trained new hires. I fixed other people's mistakes quietly. I kept receipts without meaning to. I'd never been written up. Never even had a warning. My last performance review was solid. Not glowing, but steady. Reliable. That was the word my manager liked. So when she slid a single sheet of paper across the table and said, "For now, we're placing you on administrative leave," my first thought wasn't fear. It was confusion. They escorted me out at 9:27 a.m., past people I'd had coffee with 2 days earlier, past my manager's office, door closed, past the security desk where my badge was politely taken and dropped into a plastic bin like loose change. "Don't contact anyone from the team," she said. "We'll be in touch." Then the door closed behind me. In the parking lot, I sat in my car longer than I needed to, just breathing, letting the adrenaline drain enough to think. This wasn't a firing, not officially. It was something softer, something that left no fingerprints. A pause, a reset, a chance to control the narrative before I could. That's when I realized what they'd actually done. They didn't lock me out because of something I did that morning. They locked me out because of something I'd seen weeks earlier. It hadn't felt important at the time. Just one of those things you notice when you've been around long enough. A vendor invoice that didn't quite line up with the scope. A recurring approval loop that skipped one layer it shouldn't have. Meetings that happened without notes but always before numbers were finalized. Small things, boring things. The kind of things no one worries about until someone does. By noon, my phone buzzed for the first time. Not HR, not my manager. A coworker I trusted sent a single message from her personal number. "Hey, are you okay? People are saying weird stuff." I didn't reply. Not yet. At 12:43 p.m., I checked my personal email and saw the first official message from HR land, time-stamped carefully after my access had already been cut. Subject line, "Next steps." That's when it stopped feeling accidental. I didn't know it yet, but that decision they made at 9 a.m. had already set something in motion they couldn't stop. By early afternoon, the shock had worn off, and something sharper took its place. I did what any reasonable employee would do. I reread the HR email, twice, then a third time slower, like clarity might be hidden between the lines. It wasn't. Administrative leave pending review. Please refrain from contacting colleagues. We will reach out when the review is complete. No timeline, no allegation, no name attached to the decision. I replied once, short, polite, documented. I'd like clarification on the nature of the review and confirmation this is not disciplinary. The auto reply came back within seconds. Someone had already decided I wasn't worth a human response. I called my manager, straight to voicemail. I texted him. Nothing dramatic, just, HR locked me out this morning. Can we talk? Delivered. Read. No reply. That's when irritation turned into something heavier. I'd been on enough internal projects to recognize the pattern. This wasn't HR running process. This was HR executing someone else's decision. They'd been handed a version of the story already packaged and labeled, and their job was to make it clean. Around 1:30, I started hearing what that story sounded like. Another coworker, someone I trusted less but not enough to ignore, messaged me on Signal. Off the record, they're saying you accessed files you shouldn't have. That was new and interesting because it was half true. Weeks earlier, I'd pulled a set of shared drive reports tied to a vendor we worked with regularly. Nothing restricted, no admin override, just a folder that existed because someone forgot to lock it down properly. I'd accessed it as part of a routine reconciliation, flagged a mismatch internally, and moved on. At least I thought I had. Now I understood the move. If they framed it as unauthorized access, they didn't have to explain the contents. They just had to make me look reckless enough to neutralize. And locking me out first accomplished two things. I couldn't defend myself in real time, and I couldn't see what they were changing. That's when I stopped trying to be cooperative. I opened my personal notebook, the one I kept because corporate tools had a habit of rewriting history, and wrote down everything I remembered. Dates, meeting names, who approved what, the exact phrasing my director used when he said, "Let's keep this informal." I wasn't panicking, I was irritated, and irritation, I've learned, is a better fuel. At 2:07 p.m., I checked my phone again. This time, my manager finally responded. "Can't talk right now. This is bigger than me." That sentence did more damage than silence ever could. Bigger than him meant executive level. Bigger than him meant the decision had already climbed the ladder. Bigger than him meant no one was coming to clear things up. They thought I'd disappear quietly, but that was the moment something clicked. I remembered a compliance training from years earlier. One of those dry checkbox modules everyone speeds through. There was a section on escalation paths. Not HR, not legal, but internal audit. The kind of team that doesn't care about personalities, only timelines and records. Most people never think about them. Which is why they're effective. I didn't act immediately. I read the policy again, slowly. Made sure I stayed inside the lines. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't name motives. I framed everything the way the system likes. Process gaps, documentation inconsistencies, risk exposure. At 2:38 p.m., I submitted a formal inquiry through the internal compliance portal. Anonymous by default. Time-stamped. Logged. Impossible to delete without leaving evidence. I attached nothing sensitive. Just enough to force a question. And then I waited. At exactly 3:00 p.m., my phone started buzzing. Not texts, not emails, calendar notifications, urgent, audit sync, conference room B. Access controls review, immediate. Mandatory attendance. They'd moved fast, faster than I expected. From the parking lot, I watched employees I recognized rush past the windows. Faces tight, voices low. The calm, polished confidence from that morning was gone, replaced by the kind of quiet that only appears when people realize they're no longer in control of the narrative. They thought locking me out would contain the problem. Instead, it gave it a timestamp, and that was just the beginning. By the time the calendar alerts started circulating, I wasn't surprised anymore. What surprised me was how quiet everything went afterward. No follow-up from HR, no clarification, no please hold. Just silence. The kind that doesn't mean peace, but containment. The kind organizations use when they're trying to figure out who else knows what. I drove home instead of sitting in the parking lot. I needed space to think, and more importantly, I needed to stop reacting. Up until that point, everything I'd done had been instinctive. Controlled, but instinctive. Now it had to be deliberate. I laid everything out on my kitchen table like evidence. Not physical papers, just notes, timelines, fragments of memory. I wasn't trying to prove innocence. I was trying to understand the shape of the move they'd made against me. This wasn't about the vendor invoice. Not really. That was just the thread. The real issue was that I'd existed in the space between systems, long enough to notice how often temporary exceptions became permanent, how certain approvals always happened verbally, how compliance language was used to soothe instead of correct. And I'd made one mistake. I'd assumed being quiet meant being invisible. Around 3:20 p.m., a former teammate called me. Personal phone. Whispered voice. "They're scrambling," she said. "Audit's asking for access logs. HR's freaking out. Legal just joined." That confirmed it. Audit didn't show up for misunderstandings. They showed up when process was broken in a way that left scars. And once they were involved, control stopped flowing downward. It moved sideways. People stopped coordinating and started protecting themselves. That's when I realized something important. No one was actually accusing me anymore. They'd moved past me, which should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like a warning. Because when organizations stop focusing on the person they isolated, it usually means they've accepted that the isolation failed. I checked my personal email again. Nothing new. But when I opened my cloud storage, I saw the folder I'd created months ago. Boring name, boring contents, meeting invites forwarded automatically, screenshots of system messages that seemed insignificant at the time, notes I'd written for myself because something felt off. I hadn't built it as a weapon. I'd built it as insurance. And now I understood what it really was. A mirror. Every item in that folder had context, dates that matched approvals, names that overlapped in ways they shouldn't have. Small gaps that told a larger story if someone patient enough was looking. Audit teams are nothing if not patient. At 4:10 p.m., HR finally emailed me again. "Please remain available. We may need to speak tomorrow." The tone had changed. No authority. No instructions. Just a request. They were no longer driving. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was anxious, but because my brain kept replaying moments I'd ignored before. Comments that sounded harmless. Jokes about paperwork slowing things down. The way my director always smiled when someone asked if something was documented. I stopped being angry somewhere around midnight. Anger needs an enemy. What I felt instead was clarity. They hadn't seen me as a risk. They'd seen me as background. And when background starts asking quiet questions, the instinct isn't to answer. It's to erase. By morning, I knew two things. First, I wasn't going back to that building without conditions. Second, whatever happened next couldn't be improvised. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to survive with my credibility intact. At 8:17 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. "This is HR," the voice said. "Careful now. We'd like to schedule a conversation." I agreed, but only after I asked one question. "Has internal audit completed their initial review?" There was a pause. Not long, just long enough. "Yes," she said. "They're still involved." That was all I needed to hear. They thought I was waiting for permission to come back. What they didn't realize was that, overnight, the leverage had shifted, and I wasn't the one holding my breath anymore. The call with HR was scheduled for 10 a.m. the next day. They framed it as a check-in. No accusations, no agenda, just a request for my availability and a reminder that the conversation would be documented. That alone told me everything had changed. Documentation only matters when people are preparing to explain themselves later. I joined from my personal laptop, camera on, neutral background, calm voice. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to observe. 2 HR reps. One I recognized from the day before. One new. Senior. Legal cadence in the way she spoke, even when she smiled. They thanked me for my patience. They acknowledged confusion. They emphasized that the access reset had been procedural, not punitive. The language was careful now, layered, reversible. Then they asked if I could walk them through my recent interactions with the vendor team. That was the moment the room tilted, because they weren't investigating me anymore. They were building a timeline. I answered exactly what was asked. No more, no less. Dates, meetings, who looped me in, who signed off. I didn't editorialize. I didn't speculate. I let the gaps speak for themselves. Halfway through, one of them interrupted. "Just to clarify," she said, "you didn't escalate these concerns previously?" I paused, long enough to be noticeable, not long enough to be dramatic. "I raised them informally," I said. "I was advised it would be handled." That sentence landed harder than anything emotional ever could. They nodded, took notes, moved on. At 10:47 a.m., the call ended. They said they'd follow up. Again. 10 minutes later, my former teammate texted me. They pulled our director into a room. Legal's there, no one smiling. By noon, the internal energy had shifted from quiet panic to controlled chaos. Meetings canceled, new ones added, people suddenly unavailable. Slack statuses set to "in a meeting" for hours at a time. Audit wasn't just asking for logs anymore. They were asking why certain logs didn't exist. That's when the real unraveling began. The approvals everyone swore were routine, they'd happened outside the documented workflow. The vendor exceptions that were temporary, renewed automatically for 3 quarters. The access I was accused of misusing, granted by a service account tied to my director's name. Nothing illegal on its own, nothing dramatic. But together, it told a story. Around 2 p.m., HR emailed again. Short, formal. "We're reinstating limited access while the review continues." Limited access meant they needed me visible again, not because they trusted me, but because the narrative of rogue employee no longer held. At 2:36 p.m., my manager finally called. His voice was tight, professional, tired. "I didn't know how bad it was," he said. "This went higher than I expected." I believed him. That didn't help. At 3:12 p.m., a company-wide calendar block appeared. Leadership alignment, mandatory. That's when I knew someone had lost control completely. People don't call alignment meetings when things are fine. They call them when multiple versions of the truth are colliding, and someone needs to decide which one survives. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. By late afternoon, the rumor mill had reversed direction. Whispers weren't about me anymore. They were about who had approved what, who had pushed HR to act fast, who had insisted on containing risk instead of understanding it. At 4:48 p.m., I received one final message that day from HR, personal tone stripped away entirely. "We will be discussing next steps tomorrow." No signature, no reassurance, just process. They thought this was the storm. They didn't realize the storm had already passed. What was happening now was the reckoning, the slow, methodical kind where no one gets to pretend it was sudden. And for the first time since my badge stopped working, I felt something close to calm, because chaos had moved away from me and settled exactly where it belonged. The next morning, the meeting invite came in at 8:11 a.m. No subject line this time, just a title. Resolution discussion. HR, legal, my director, someone from internal audit. I joined from the same spot at my kitchen table. Same neutral background, same calm posture. I wasn't trying to project confidence anymore. I didn't need to. They opened with an apology, not the emotional kind, the corporate one, carefully worded, passive voice. Steps were taken prematurely. Information was incomplete. Process improvements are being evaluated. No one said the word mistake. They didn't have to. Internal audit spoke next. Brief. Clinical. They confirmed their review was ongoing, but made one thing very clear. The decision to cut my access and place me on leave had not followed escalation protocol. That alone shifted liability away from me permanently. Then HR asked what I wanted, not demanded. Asked. I told them exactly what I needed. Everything in writing, a clean personnel record, neutral reference language locked in, and separation from the reporting line involved. Permanently. No raised voices, no threats. Just terms. They didn't push back. By the end of the call, it was decided I wouldn't be returning to my role. Not because I was guilty, but because it was no longer an optimal fit. The phrasing made me smile. They offered a settlement. Modest, but fair. Enough runway to choose my next move without panic. More importantly, enough acknowledgement that what happened to me wouldn't quietly repeat with someone else. 2 days later, my access was fully restored, just long enough for me to collect my personal files and close out my work properly. My director was already on leave. His name disappeared from org charts faster than mine ever did. No announcement, no drama, just absence. On my last day, no one escorted me out. No clipboard, no practiced smile. I turned in my badge at the security desk like a normal employee ending a normal chapter. Walking to my car, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry anymore. They hadn't beaten me, and I hadn't beaten them. The system had simply turned inward, the way it always does when someone pulls too hard on the wrong thread. Weeks later, a recruiter asked why I'd left my previous company. I told the truth, the version that matters. Structural changes, I said. It was time. That was enough. Sometimes karma isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't clap or announce itself. Sometimes it just lets people live with the paperwork they created. And sometimes the most satisfying ending is walking away clean, knowing they'll be explaining your absence for a very long time.